Please.
Right this way, sir. Please follow me. Testimony will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Have a seat, sir.
Thank you. There you are. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name?
Philip Buxton,
And how do you spell your last name?
B-U-X-T-O-N.
And, sir, where do you live?
I live in Franklin, Mass.
And how long have you lived in Franklin?
A little over 10 years.
Okay. Where in Franklin do you live?
I live at 599 Old West Central Street in Unit A4.
Okay. And just describe where you live.
It's a condominium. There are 4 connected buildings with 12 units in each building.
Okay. And what floor, you're in A4, what floor is that?
The ground floor.
And how many units are on the ground floor?
4.
And how many levels are there to each of these buildings?
There are 3 levels to each building.
And what units are then on the second floor?
There would be 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then 9, 10, 11, 12 on the third floor.
Okay. And in building, you're in building A, is that right?
Correct.
And do you know one of your neighbors by the name of Carol Bailey?
Yes.
And do you know what floor she lives on?
Yes.
And what floor is that, sir?
She lives on the third floor.
Do you know what unit she lives in?
I believe it's 11.
Now, sometime, well, let me just ask you this. In terms of your location, this condominium complex, is it referred to as Ledgewood?
Correct.
And where is that in relation to any major roadways?
It's right off of Route 140 and near 495.
Okay. So I'm just going to show you first a photograph and ask you if you recognize what's depicted in this photograph.
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
I see my condominium complex.
Okay. And does it show adjoining roadways?
Yes, Route 140.
Okay. And what about 495?
Yes, and 495.
And is there a shopping complex near your home?
Yes, there is.
Okay. And is that depicted in the lower part of this?
Yes.
Let me just show you this next. Do you recognize this as a map of the area?
Yes.
Okay. And does that show the general location of where you live?
Yes.
Okay. And does it? You live in the town of Franklin?
Correct.
Does this map show some of the other adjoining towns and the other some of the roadways through these towns?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd offer these as the next exhibit, please.
No objection. Come out to the next exhibit.
$289 and $290.
Thank you. Now, sir, I'm just going to have you direct your attention to the left screen there. I'm placing 289 on the overhead. Sir, can you see that all right?
Yes.
And is that the first document that I just showed you a few moments ago?
Yes.
And sir, does that reflect the complex that you've described at your home the last 10 years?
Yes.
Can you just point to that, sir, if you would?
In the upper
Up here,
right-hand
sir.
corner, yes.
Okay. And with regard to the roadways I asked you about, you indicated there was Route 140,
Yes,
and is that shown as running across here, the center of the photograph?
yes it is.
And also, I think I had asked you about 495, you indicated that's reflected,
Yes,
is that over in this lower?
yes it is.
In the shopping center that you described, at this area?
Yes.
And so, the formation of the buildings, is there somewhat of a courtyard in the middle?
There is.
I'm just going to show you this now, which has been marked 290. You recognize that as the map I just showed you a few moments ago.
Yes,
And does that depict your general location where your home at 599 Old West Central Street in Franklin is?
yes,
And is there a mark essentially on the map in the general location?
yes.
And how is that depicted here, sir? Let me try and zoom in a little bit.
The green dot,
This green dot?
yes,
Okay. And though, this roadway here, do you know what that road is? I started that along.
oh yeah, that's Route 140.
Okay. And 495, is that depicted on this map as well?
Yes,
Okay. Sir, have you ever been to Gillette Stadium?
yes I am.
And to travel to Gillette, how do you go?
Usually 495 south to Route 1 north.
Okay. And so, from that location, you're indicating 495 south, would that be in this direction here?
Correct.
And you would travel to what intersecting road, sir?
Route 1,
Route 1. And is that depicted by this roadway here, sir?
yes,
And this area up in here, are you familiar with the general location of Gillette Stadium?
yes,
And is that near that area of where you've traveled to Gillette Stadium?
yes,
So are you familiar with North Attleboro?
yes,
And is North Attleboro shown on this map?
yes,
Is that down in this area, sir?
correct.
And then the travel, strike that. Route 1, you know Route 1, you say you've taken it north after getting on 495 to Gillette. You ever traveled southerly on 495 on Route 1?
Yes,
Now, sir, taking you back to May of 2013, you were living at your home in that complex.
yes.
And in May of 2013, did you see anybody moving in to Building A?
Yes.
And what first attracted your attention about the moving in?
They had a rent-a-center truck.
And when you said they had a Rent-A-Center truck, was your attention drawn to certain items coming off a Rent-A-Center truck?
Yes.
And just what types of items were?
Couches and other type of furniture.
Okay. And did you see anybody who was involved in the move at that time?
There was a man, stocky black man with light-colored hair or short hair.
Okay. And when you saw him, just describe what he was doing.
Well, he was out by a car that I assumed was his.
Okay. What kind of car was that, sir?
It was a gray Suburban.
And did you make any observations about the gray Suburban in terms of its a registration, it's a plate number. right?
Yes,
Or a plate.
it had New Jersey plates on it.
And how long did you when you first observed on the occasion of the move, this Rent-A-Center truck, how long did you see that individual on that day?
Briefly,
Did you see him on subsequent dates in or around your building?
yes,
On how many other occasions?
2 or 3.
Okay. And did you see him on those other occasions with a motor vehicle?
Yes,
And what kind of motor vehicle?
the gray Suburban.
Sir, I'm just going to, if I could approach, Your Honor. Sir, I'm just going to show you what's previously been marked, Exhibit 20. You recognize this individual?
Yes,
And who do you recognize that to be?
the person moving into A12.
I could use you later on. Thank you. So is that the individual you saw on the occasions you've described?
Yes,
And do you recall when the last occasion, do you know whether you saw him after June of 2013?
no, I didn't.
And sir, did you ever see any other vehicle in or around the building?
Yes,
And what other vehicle did you see?
black Hummer.
And where did you see that?
It was parked in the parking lot.
And did you ever see anybody in or around the black Hummer?
No,
If I could have one moment, Your Honor. Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
Mr. Marston,
yes,
you stated that you saw a Rent-A-Center truck in May.
yes.
Was that May 15th, sir?
I don't remember the date.
And on that day, you stated that you saw this gentleman that you just described.
Yes,
That day, did you also meet Kevin Anderson from the Patriots?
no,
Did you meet Barbara Scardino, a real estate agent?
no.
Nothing further.
Nothing else, Your Honor. Thank you, sir. Your Honor, if I could call Carol Bailey, please.
Your Honor, could we approach before this witness?
Please face the clerk and raise your right hand.
You solemnly swear that your testimony will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do. Have a seat.
Yeah, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name?
Carol Martin Bailey,
Okay. Could you spell your last name, please?
Bailey,
And where do you live?
599 Old West Central Street in Franklin, Massachusetts, and that's Ledgewood Condos, and I'm number A11.
How long have you lived there, ma'am?
Since the mid-'70s,
And just generally describe the condominium complex, please.
there are 4 buildings. Each one has 12 condo units, and it's arranged in a kind of a square that's missing one side, and in the center of that is a courtyard, and most people enter the buildings by walking through the courtyard and going into the entrance to their particular building.
Okay. And the building that you were located in was?
Building A,
Okay. And the other buildings are designated how?
B, C, D,
Okay. And each building has how many units?
12,
And are they broken up on how many number of floors?
4 on each floor.
Your apartment, you indicate is A11. What floor is that on?
The 3rd floor,
And what other apartments are on the floor that you live on?
9, 10, myself, and 12.
And did you know, or taking you back to the spring of 2013, did you know most of your neighbors?
Yes,
And sometime in that spring, did you know if anybody, say in April or March, April, was anybody living in A12?
in March and April it was empty.
Okay. And during that time, or sometime after it was empty, do you know if that unit was rented?
Yes,
And do you recall that being rented sometime in May of? Or
I would
around-
say in May, yes.
And did you ever meet the person or person who then rented that apartment?
Well, I mentioned that there's a courtyard in the, that all the buildings face a courtyard. Pardon?
The question is simply, did you meet the person?
Oh, yes. I was sitting in the courtyard and I met a person.
Okay. And that person, if you just describe that person.
That person was extremely friendly, pleasant, identified himself as George, and he said that he was moving into that unit with his cousin.
Okay, and just give us a description of that person.
He was black, kind of stocky, with maybe in his 40s, with very short, curly, salt and pepper hair.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Just going to show you what's been marked exhibit number 20. Do you recognize this individual, ma'am?
Yes.
And who do you recognize that to be?
Well, that's George. Except I never saw George looking like that.
Motion strikes loud. Listen carefully, please. Just answer the specific question that's asked of you. And go on and add anything.
Okay.
Ma'am, on that day when you met George, how long did you speak with him?
Just a few minutes.
Okay. And over the next several days or weeks, did you have other occasions to see George?
Yes.
Okay. On how many occasions would you say you saw him?
I would see him several times a week, coming or going, and because I'd be in the courtyard and he'd be coming or going.
And did you ever see him with anybody else?
Yes.
And who was that?
That was Mr. Hernandez.
And when you say Mr. Hernandez, do you know Mr. Hernandez's full name?
Aaron Hernandez.
Okay. Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Could you just point him out and describe what he's wearing, please?
Sitting there, and he's wearing a black jacket and a blue and gray striped tie.
Your Honor, the record can reflect the witness identifying him. Now, how many occasions did you see George and the defendant together?
Just a couple of times.
Do you recall the first time you met the defendant? you saw him?
Yes, he
Okay.
came up, pardon, yes,
Let me ask you this. Where were you when you first either saw or met him?
in the courtyard.
And what were you doing in the courtyard?
I was sitting reading.
And do you recall what type of day it was in terms of the weather?
Yes, it was very warm. It was a very warm day.
Okay. And as a result of it being very warm, how were you dressed?
I had a tank top and shorts.
And at some point, was your attention drawn to somebody in the courtyard area?
Yes,
And who was that?
Mr. Hernandez.
Okay. And where did you first see him?
I saw him walking from the driveway up into the courtyard.
And at that time, did you make observations of him?
Yes,
And just describe how did he appear at that time?
he was wearing gray sweatpants and a gray hoodie, and the hoodie was pulled up over his head.
Okay. When you say it was pulled up over his head, how far was it pulled up over his head?
Such that I could only see his face.
Okay, you're holding up your hands to the side of your face. Did you have any interaction with him at that time?
The first time I saw him, I said, "Hello, you
The
must
question
be."
is simply, did you have any interaction?
Yes.
Okay, and just what did you say to him?
I said, "Hello, you must be my new neighbor upstairs. You must be George's cousin."
And did he respond to that?
He just looked toward me and made a or a sort of a nondescript sound.
Okay. Did you have any further conversation at that time?
No.
Where did you see him go from there?
He went into the building and upstairs.
And on how many occasions did you see him either coming or going to the building?
Not many.
And if you can quantify that, what is it?
Maybe once or twice a week.
And on the once or twice a week, did you see how he was coming to the apartment building and leaving? How was he traveling?
He was wearing a hoodie and sweatpants.
Did you ever see him in clothing other than a hoodie and sweatpants?
No.
And during the occasions that you saw them, what was the weather like on those days?
Warm.
Now, did you see how he was actually traveling to the complex, meaning in a vehicle or?
He was coming from the parking lot. He was walking from the parking lot.
Did you know what kind of vehicle he had, if any?
Sometimes he was coming from a black Hummer and sometimes a large Chevy Suburban SUV.
And do you recall what color that large Chevy Suburban SUV was?
Very light, either white or silver or light gray.
Did you ever make any observations of the license plate in terms of where the plate, what state it was from?
The SUV was had New Jersey plates.
Now, on the occasions that you saw him, well, let me ask you this: how many occasions did you ever see him and George together?
Probably 2 or 3 times.
And can you just describe, were they coming or going or?
Coming
And when they came together, did you see where they went?
into the building and upstairs.
And now, how close is your apartment at A11 to A12?
We're next door neighbors. We share a common wall the entire length of the condo.
Did you ever see either the defendant or George coming in or out of the apartment?
Yes.
And how much time would you say, again, in May and June, how frequently were the two of them at that A12?
If you could just clarify, you're talking at the same time?
Sure. How many times did you see George in the apartment or around the apartment during May and June?
Probably 5 or 6 times.
And how about the defendant?
I don't recall ever seeing him in the building.
Did you ever see him going into the building?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then did you ever see him leaving the building?
No.
So, in terms of the proximity of your apartment to 812, were you ever in your apartment and hearing things from 812?
No.
You never heard any when I say hearing things, just voices?
When I have to, am
I'm
I?
gonna, this question can be answered yes or no.
Did you ever, when you were in your apartment or around your apartment, did you ever hear any noise or voices coming from 812?
Yes.
Okay. And how many occasions did you hear noises or voices from?
Several times. I mean, several times a week.
Okay, just describe what noises or voices you hear.
Male voices, loud. Male voices, loud. Kind of what I would expect locker room-ish.
I'm gonna strike everything after loud.
Now, at some point, ma'am, after the first occasion that you saw either the defendant or George, did you notice in terms of the around the apartment, seeing them near around the apartment, did you notice something change in the common area between your apartment and 812?
Subject to the form of the question, Your Honor.
Can you just describe outside of your door to your apartment, so on the third floor, just describe that area?
There's a central hallway that 4 units have a doorway that enters into that central hallway.
Okay. And to get to that central hallway, are there, just between the floors, how do you travel from the first floor to the third floor?
You come up the stairs in a stairwell.
And at the top of the stairwell, this area, how big is it?
Oh,
Just in terms of, can you give us?
I don't know, 10 feet by 10 feet.
Okay. And off that area are, how many doors are there to these apartments?
2.
Okay, and so when you get to the top of the stairs, how do you access your apartment?
I go through a swinging door into that inner hallway where each unit has a door.
I see, okay. And what other unit has a door inside that inner unit?
All 4 units, 9, 10, 11, and 12.
Now, do you recall in May of 2013 that the day of a move, did you recall anyone moving into the A12 in terms of any items?
Yes, a truck that said some sort of rental furniture on the side of it came, and a lot of furniture was unloaded and taken into the building and upstairs.
Okay. And did you see George on that day?
No.
Okay. Do you know how long after that day before you saw George?
I would say it was the next day.
And when you saw him, what was he doing?
Walking through the courtyard to the door.
And was that the first occasion you had met him?
Yes.
Now, after the day that either you saw the truck or the next day when you saw George, did you notice anything outside of your apartment door in the common area?
Object to the leading, Your Honor.
Same form of question.
What, if anything, changed about the condition of the common area outside your door?
Nothing immediately.
Okay. Sometime later, did something change?
Yes.
What was that?
There was an air freshener plugged in the hallway at the top of the stairs. There was a small glass container with some sort of oil in it that had wick-type sticks coming out of it. That was both of those were in the hallway at the top of the stairs. And through the swinging doors, there was another one of the glass containers with liquid in it with wicking sticks.
Now, after you made those observations of those items, sometime after that, did you notice any smell in this area?
Well, first I smelled the air fresheners, and then shortly thereafter, there was a very unpleasant smell in the hallway.
Okay, and if you could just describe, what was that unpleasant smell that you smelled in the hallway?
To me, it smelled a little bit like, it smelled more like skunk than anything else I could think of.
And just give us an idea of how strong or weak that smell was.
Very strong.
And where did you first detect that smell? Where were you?
I was walking, excuse me, I was walking through the hallway.
Later on, did you ever have an occasion to be in your apartment and smell that smell?
Yes, frequently.
How, after this first occasion where you saw the furniture truck or you met George the following day, how frequently would you smell this smell?
Frequently in the evening.
And when you say frequently, how often in terms of how many days a week?
Several days a week.
And on the occasions that you could smell it, could you hear any noises coming from A12?
Not unless I was in the hallway.
Okay. Were there occasions where you could smell this, where you could hear noises from the hallway?
Yes.
And what kinds of noises could you hear?
The same I described before, male voices, loud. I couldn't decipher anything that was said.
Okay. And how long, over what period of time did you smell these smells as you've described?
From May into the middle of June.
Okay. Now, sometime you say in the middle of June, did something happen that you didn't smell the smell anymore?
Yes,
And what was that?
I didn't see them.
Now, when you say you didn't see them, did you see at any time thereafter, did you ever see either George or the defendant at the complex or near the apartment?
No.
If I could have a moment, Your Honor, please.
Hello, Ms. Bailey. You mentioned you saw a truck moving furniture into the building, correct?
Yes.
And you believe that that furniture was going to Unit A12, the unit that you share a floor with.
Yes.
Do you recall that being on May 15th?
I have no recollection of the date.
Do
But
you,
it was-
would you agree that it was in the middle of May, based on your recollection?
It could have been mid to early, but it was right before. It was after I heard that the unit had been rented.
That's fine, ma'am. That's fine. Mid to early. And I believe you also testified on direct that there was no more activity after mid-June.
Right.
So the period of time about which you're testifying is a brief window of a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And in June of 2013, you lived in another unit on the third floor. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in the warmer months, it was your custom to go outside to the courtyard during the day. Is that right?
Yes.
And you would go out to the courtyard anywhere from 11 a.m. to 5 or 6 or p.m. or so every day?
Yes,
And you had a little chair out there,
yes,
and you did some gardening out there.
yes,
And it was during that 6-hour period that some of the observations you testified to today were made.
yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Nothing further.
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Patrick Quinn, please, Your Honor.
Patrick Wynn.
Quinn.
Wynn.
Right this way, sir. Please go ahead. Please face the clerk and raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear that your testimony will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir. Could you please state your full name and spell your last name for our jurors?
My name is Patrick Quinn, Quinn.
And how old are you, sir?
I'm 39 years old.
Do you work?
Yes,
Where do you work?
I work for T-Mobile.
And how long have you worked for T-Mobile?
I've been there almost 5 years.
And what is your current position with T-Mobile, please?
I'm a senior RF deployment engineer.
And what types of duties and responsibilities do you have as in that capacity?
Yeah, I work with a team of other RF engineers. We manage the performance, design, and capacity of T-Mobile's radio access network.
And when you say radio access network, what do you mean by that?
I'm just referring to the cell sites that process your telephone calls and your data sessions from your wireless device.
Now, prior to joining T-Mobile, can you just give the jurors an idea of what your training and education is and where you had previously worked?
Yep. I have a bachelor's degree, a Bachelor of Science in Electronic Engineering Technology from Wentworth Institute of Technology. Previous work experience, I also worked for Nextel, which was bought out during my tenure there by Sprint. I worked there for 5 years. I've had on-the-job training. I've taken vendor-specific classes, that is to say, the equipment that resides at the cell sites. I was able to take formal training through that vendor.
And when you joined T-Mobile, what office did you go to?
The office is in Norton, Massachusetts.
And can you tell us, is that office there responsible geographically for a portion of the T-Mobile network?
Yes.
And describe that to us, please.
The geographic location includes all of Rhode Island, Massachusetts. It also includes Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont.
And on a day-to-day basis, what types of things do you do, please?
The main thing is we address network degradation. That is to say, when cell sites, when they block or drop calls excessively, our engineers perform root cause analysis, and we determine what the problem is, and we either resolve those issues ourselves or we dispatch field technicians to resolve issues.
And sort of what type of information do you rely on in order to perform that portion of your job function?
We rely on network statistics. So the cell sites, every time you make a phone call or data session, it collects the network anomalies, the blocks and drops, and we can run reports on our switch records that enable us to let us know where in an area there's a lot of drops or block calls. That indicates poor performance, and we try to remedy that with new sites or changing the power of the sites. Those are just a couple examples.
And that monitoring of the cell sites, is that something that is done on a constant basis, including after hours?
It is.
And how is that done, please?
During the day, basically what happens is if a site is dropping or blocking excessively, we have real-time reports, and those reports are generated on the switch, and they're actually emailed through Microsoft Outlook. There's an email that comes in, and it basically tells us which sites are dropping or blocking, and we can take an action on them. That's done during the day, and then after hours, we have an on-call engineer who logs into the network once a night, Monday through Friday, and he does the same thing. He looks for network degradation through those emails. And then on weekends, we check the network twice a day. On Saturdays, twice a day, and Sundays, twice a day. And also on holidays if there's no work that day.
Now, as a result of your job responsibilities, are you familiar with the manner in which a cell site and a cellular telephone communicate with each other?
Yes.
And could you tell us, in general, how does that happen, please?
Right. When you turn your cell phone on, basically the cell phone looks for the cell site with the strongest signal. It latches on. There's some authentication that's done. It makes sure the device has permission to camp on that network. And then what happens is, if nothing's done by the user, this cell phone will just be what's called idle. It'll just listen to that cell site. When you go to initiate a voice call or a data session, it will communicate through the device through an RF signal that's sent to the cell site, and it will request permission to either set up a phone call or a data session. From that point, the cell site communicates over a wire line similar to like Verizon Fios to our switch, and the switch will set up a call path either for data or text or voice, and then the switch will tell the cell site to let that happen. This all happens in microseconds.
And when you say RF signal, what do you mean?
RF signal basically is very similar to when you turn your radio on and you listen to an FM station. It's listening to a radio wave, and it's tuned to a certain frequency. The cellular telephone does it both ways. It's a transceiver. It receives and it transmits.
And so that connection, cellular telephone to cell site in the T-Mobile network is by this type of signal, RF, is that correct?
Yes.
And is that the portion of the network that you're responsible for, that connection, cell phone to cell site?
Yes.
And after the signal gets to the cell site, you described it moves along by some other means to the switch, is that true?
Yep. The cell phone equipment processes the signal, and it puts it into the technology that's used by the wireline. The wireline carries that information to a central office, also known as a switch. There's another set of equipment that processes that signal, and then it routes it either to the World Wide Web. It can route it to a public switching telephone network, which is a land-based line telephone network, or it routes it to another cell phone carrier if you're calling another cell phone.
Now, the connection between the cellular telephone and the cell site, is that the same whether the cellular telephone is engaging in a voice conversation, a text message, or data from the internet?
Yes.
And can you describe how it is that that can happen for all those three things, please?
Yep. So basically, the cell site, it's the first point into our network. So there's a variety of equipment there that will process your user data differently. So if it's a voice call, it's processed differently than a data session, or it's processed differently through a text message. And it does that at the base station. It's sort of like a translator. And then it puts it over that, like I said, that landline. And then when it gets to the switch, it knows exactly where it's going to go and get picked up and processed.
So it's after it's entered into the network that it makes the separation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I may, Your Honor? I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 254. Do you recognize the information contained in Exhibit 254?
Yes.
And it's fair to say Exhibit 254 is the subscriber information for a T-Mobile cellular telephone number 617-785-3008, listed to Odin Lloyd. Is that correct?
Yes.
And have you had an opportunity as well to look at the information in Exhibit 255?
Yes.
And this is a record from T-Mobile concerning activity, particularly with respect to cell tower activity for that cell phone number 617-785-3008. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, Your Honor, the exhibit's been stated. Is it okay if I remove the statement? Yeah. And one of the things that this record contains is detail of the data used by that cellular telephone number 617-785-3008. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you describe for us, sir, when a phone is using data, does that require the user of the phone to be doing anything to it affirmatively in order for the phone to be conducting communications with the cell site for the purposes of data?
No.
And can you just explain why that is, please?
Well, when your phone, just because you're not interfacing with it, your phone is receiving updates via email, your inbox updates, or your Facebook may update. So there's data sessions that run in the background, and it's not really RF expert analysis, but it's kind of common knowledge.
And in your own experience dealing with these issues in the field, is that correct?
Yes.
And so this particular phone, if you have a smartphone, is it fair to say that it can have these communications?
Yes.
Okay. Now, with regard to this cellular telephone 3008, beginning on June 17th of 2013 at 2:32 in the morning, were you asked to look at the cell site locations that were used for the purposes of the phone communicating data with the T-Mobile network?
I was.
And were you able to determine, using the record, which T-Mobile cell site locations were used by the phone to communicate data with the T-Mobile network?
Yes.
If I may approach your honor, please. I'm going to show you a series of documents. Do you recognize what those documents are, please?
Yes.
What is depicted, well, just sort of in a general sense, what are those items that I've just handed to you?
This is a map of the local Boston area, listing cities and towns and streets and routes. These are also yellow pushpins, which indicate the location of the cell sites in which data sessions were placed on this particular mobile device.
And did you go to each of these locations that is identified by a yellow circle there?
I did.
And using the records of T-Mobile and going to those locations, were you able to confirm the presence of a T-Mobile antenna or cell site at each of those locations?
Yes.
And do those locations show the communication through the data that appears in the data record of the 3008 telephone from June 17th at 2:32 a.m. through the end of the day, or the end of the record there of June 17th?
I did.
And that's in those documents, is that correct?
It is.
I'm going to offer these as an exhibit, please, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I have no objection to this being used as a chart, but I object to it being marked as an exhibit.
I'd ask that it be an exhibit, Your Honor.
Objections overruled.
Do you want these separately? A through E.
I'm showing you now what's been marked as 291A. Do you see that, please, on this screen?
Yes.
And can you orient us to what's depicted there in 291A, please?
Again, this is a map of the Boston local area and surrounding towns with routes through this area. It also, again, shows the yellow pushpins, which identifies a T-Mobile cell site location that processed data calls from that cellular device that I was shown.
And that's the overall location of those transmissions, is that correct? Are the cell sites related to those transmissions, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to show you, if I could, now, this is 291B, and do you see, well, tell us what is depicted in 291B. Is this a subset of that 291A?
Yeah, it's just a subset map of Cambridge. You can see in the upper right, Fenway Park, the Mass Pike, and Route 95 through Wellesley Needham.
And over on the right-hand side, are you familiar with this particular area of the city of Boston?
Yes, this is the Roxbury-Dorchester area.
And did you travel to these locations here that are depicted by the yellow circles?
I did.
And now, with reference to the record, exhibit number 255, this particular location here, is this a cell site that was used in a transmission in the early morning of June 17th of 2013?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you Exhibit 255, the portion of the data detail record, beginning at the top of the page there, at 2:32 a.m., do you recognize, can you see what's depicted there?
Yes.
Do you need to make, do you need to have that any larger? Or is that okay?
No, that's okay.
Okay. Can you tell us that very first line there, does that relate to that particular site that I just pointed out to you?
It does.
And could you tell us what the relationship is of that site that I pointed out to you to that line?
That would be the first line
Yes.
right here.
And was that the cell site location that was used during the course of that transmission, that first transmission at 2:32 a.m.?
It was.
And you see now, down to the third line at 2:32 a.m., this particular cell site identifier?
Yes.
And is that particular location also identified on this map, 291B, as cell site that was used to communicate at 2:32 a.m.?
It was.
Going back to 291B, could you point out that particular, does the cell site appear there?
Yes.
And can you point that out, please, and identify that for us?
It's right here.
The second,
Yep.
the second 2:32 a.m., correct?
Yes.
And does this record then show the next cell tower used for the purposes of communication? And if I could, the next tower used for the purposes of the communication at 2:34 a.m., were there two towers that were used?
Two cell IDs, yes.
Two cell IDs. And are those two cell locations also depicted on this map, 291B, the two cell locations that were used at 2:34 a.m.?
Yes.
So I'm going to go back to 291B. Can you point out the two cell site locations that were used to communicate with the 3008 phone for the purposes of data at 2:34 a.m.?
It's right here.
This one?
I believe so,
That's the one
yes.
that was pointed
Yes.
out? And did it also communicate with this other one here at that same time?
Yes.
Or in that same minute?
Yes.
Now, moving ahead, to the next location. You see contact there of the phone with the cell site, the very next one?
Yes.
And what time is that, please?
2:45 a.m.
And did you travel to the location that was used at 2:45 a.m.?
Yes.
And does that also appear in Exhibit 291B?
Yes.
And can you point that out, please, and identify that for us?
Should be this one, I believe.
This is the one that you're pointing to here, is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes.
Now, the next cell site that's indicated on the record, do you see that located here also at 2:45 a.m.?
Yes.
And that also you traveled to, is that correct?
Yes.
And that was also on this map, 291B, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you point that out, please, and identify that for us, please?
So there's another one right here.
Just above it, is
Yes.
that correct? Now, when the cell site locations are placed, what determines where they are placed and how the coverage is made of the area, please?
Yep. So each cell site location is designed such that as you're driving through an area, we need to have overlapping coverage with the next site. If that's not effectively planned or implemented, you're going to result in drop calls. So as the wireless device is moving, just as much as it communicates, it's also a measuring device, and it's always looking to camp on or be idle or transmit through the strongest signal.
Now, when you went to this location, were you familiar with what this roadway is here in green?
Yes,
What is that, please?
that's I-90 Massachusetts Turnpike.
Now, the very next series of data communications from the 2:45 a.m. is a series of communications at 2:46 a.m. Is that correct?
Yes,
And those communications as they happen now, are those depicted on the map 291B?
yes.
Again, just with reference to 291B, can you, the next tower that was used in communicating data after the 2:45 a.m. communication, can you point that out for us, please? This one here?
Yes.
Yes. And can you tell us where that's located?
That's located at Fenway Park.
And where at Fenway Park is that located, please?
You can see the lights there, the stanchions. They look like crisscross lattice towers. If you have a keen eye and maybe you're not driving, you can actually see the panel antenna.
And in fact, in that area, the very next communication that is made, can you point out the cell site for that? This one, this dot here, is that correct?
Yes,
Now, all of these cell sites are fairly close together, is that correct?
yes,
And do they provide coverage of that highway, the Massachusetts Turnpike, Route 9?
yes,
And so in the order, I think that you said the very next one is here, is that correct?
yep.
So that first one at 246, that's the Fenway Park location that you described?
Yes.
And and these next two communications that show cell site information, those are the that next dot over, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, can you see there that on the record, those two cell site locations that you just described being at that same location, they have different cell site identifiers, is that correct?
Right.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
And can you explain how there can be antenna or cell sites with different identifiers in the record, but yet be located at the same spot?
Yes. So at a cell site location, there's multiple antennas. There could be one. There could be up to four. Each of those antennas have a different cell ID because there's a radio attached to those antennas. And as RF engineers, we make changes to our network remotely. We can change the power, we can change the tilt of the antennas. We have to know what site we're, we call it optimizing or fine-tuning. We have to know which site it is. So the cell ID is just like your own cell device. It's identified by its cell phone number. For the cell site equipment, it's identified by its cell ID.
Now, moving down the record,
the next data session, it indicates a cell tower occurs at 2:49 a.m. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in the in-between there, and on other places in this record, there are connections with the network for the purposes of data, but there's no cell site location given. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what type of equipment is being used that doesn't capture the cell site location that's used on the record?
Yeah, this is a switch record. This is provided by our legal affairs department. This is a data session that's placed on our LTE network. I'm not aware of why the cell ID information is not there. Our LTE network is new, and I'm not aware of why it's not collected.
But on this particular record, those LTE sessions don't show up with cell site information, correct?
Yes.
And so the very next data session that's indicated now is this one at 2:49 a.m., correct?
Yes.
And at 2:46, I believe you described that this was the two locations that were used, correct?
Yes.
The last two? And at 2:49 now, could you show us? Maybe,
Sorry, I couldn't.
Yeah, I'm
it's
sorry.
cut off over.
yeah? Oh,
Okay.
okay. So I think at 2:46 you described this was the tower, there were two locations at that spot,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
At 2:49 now, could you show us what cell tower location or cell site location that was used for the purposes of that communication? This location here, is that correct?
Yes.
Does that also provide coverage to the Massachusetts Turnpike?
Yes.
Next tower at 250, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you show us on the map there where that tower is located? This location here, is that correct?
Yes.
Does that also provide coverage to Route 90 and the Massachusetts Turnpike?
It does.
Next communications also at 250, is that correct? That has a cell site?
Yes.
And that location also appears on the map, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you point that out, please? That's this location here, just under the word Watertown, is that correct?
Correct.
Does that also provide coverage to the Massachusetts Turnpike?
It does.
The next data session that appears in the record with the cell site location, do you see that in the record?
Yes.
Can you tell us what time in the morning that data session connected with a cell site in the T-Mobile network, please?
2:53 a.m.
And were you able to locate the cell site that was used in the course of that data transmission?
Yes.
I'm going back now to 291B. Do you see that particular cell site
Yes.
on the exhibit 291B?
Yes.
And that's here, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you tell us, you described this as Route 90, the Massachusetts Turnpike, correct?
Yes.
In green, and this roadway here, where they intersect just below your cell site location, what roadway is that?
It's Route 128.
And the very next data transmission that has a cell site location on the record. You see that on the record?
Yes.
And that occurs at 2:55 a.m. in the morning on June 17th, is that correct?
Correct.
And did you go to that location, and can you, where that cell site was?
Yes. It's here.
That's this one here, is that correct?
Correct.
And that particular location, could you tell us where that is in relationship to the roadway?
That's right off of 128.
And does that cell site provide coverage to Route 128 or 95 as it is there at both spots?
Yes.
Now, you see two cell sites here, 2:55 and 2:56 in the morning. Do you see that?
Yes.
And is that the cell site that was used in the course of that communication, or those two communications, were you able to determine whether they were located at the same place?
Yes.
And is that one of those circumstances where even though they have the same location, they have different numbers?
Exactly.
And just with reference to 191B, you see that here?
Yes.
And where's that, please? That's located here, is that correct?
Yes.
And does that provide coverage of that roadway 128 or 95?
It does.
And the next cell location that was used for which there's a tower, do you see that at 258?
Yes.
And did you go to that location?
I did.
And does that appear here on this portion of the map, Exhibit 291B?
Yes.
Can you point that out, please, and identify that? That's this location here?
Yes.
Does that also provide coverage to Route 128-95 there?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to show you 291C. Do you recognize, or tell us, orient us to 291C, please?
Again, this is a map with roadways. This is in the Westwood-Norwood area. This is the intersection of where 95 meets 128 and 93.
And just now with relationship to 291A, that's in this part of the map, is that correct?
Correct.
Or it begins at that location. So now with reference to 291C, the last communication you described was at 2:58, now moving down to 3:03 a.m. on June 17th. You see that?
Yes.
And did you go to the location described in the record, exhibit number that's depicted there for that transmission, exhibit number 255?
Yes.
And can you, do you see that on the map, exhibit 291C?
Yes.
And can you point that out, please, and identify that?
This push pin?
This location here, is that correct?
Yes.
And does this location provide coverage for this general vicinity here, including 95 now heading south after it splits?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to show you the next data communication at 3:07 a.m. You see that?
Yes.
And did you go to that location and identify a T-Mobile cellular location?
Yes.
Cell site location?
Yes.
And is that cell site location depicted here on the map?
It is.
Can you point that out, please, and identify that?
This location?
That's this location here, is that correct?
Yes.
Show you the next cellular communication with the T-Mobile network. You see that at 3:08 a.m. on June 17th of 2013.
Yes.
And did you travel to that location?
I did.
And did you identify a T-Mobile cell site at that location?
Yes.
And can you point that out, please, and identify that on the map? This location here, is that correct?
Yes.
And does that location provide coverage of that Route 95 southbound?
It does.
I'm going to show you now what's been marked as Exhibit 291D. Do you see what's depicted there?
Yes.
And can you tell us what's depicted in Exhibit 291D, please?
This is a map of the Foxborough Mansfield area. The yellow push pins represent T-Mobile cell site locations.
And now as we're looking at Exhibit 291A, we're moving further south, is that correct?
Yes.
In this area, is that true?
Yes.
Now, I'm showing you the portion of Exhibit 255. The next two cell sites that were used in the course of the data communications, do you see those?
Yes.
At 3:14 a.m. on June 17th of 2013.
Yes.
And is this another circumstance in which those cell sites, even though they have different numbers, are located at the same place?
Yes.
And do you see did you travel to that location and identify the T-Mobile cell site there?
I did.
And with reference now to 291D, do you see that location on the map?
Yes.
And can you point that out, please? This location here in the vicinity of Foxborough, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, next communication that's indicated here in the data, you see that at 3:09 3:16 a.m. On June 17th, 2013.
Yes.
And did you travel to the cell site that was used for that communication to make a determination whether that's a T-Mobile cell site?
Yes.
And what did you determine with respect to that?
It's located here.
That's this location here on the east side of 95 South, is that correct?
Yes.
And this roadway here now, what route is that?
That's Route 495.
Now, see this very next communication here on the record, Exhibit 255, after that 3:16 a.m. communication.
Yes.
And does that document the cell site location that was used for the phone to communicate with the T-Mobile network for the purposes of data at 3:17 a.m. on June 17th of 2013?
Yes.
And did you go to that location to determine whether or not that was a T-Mobile website, or cell site, I'm sorry?
I did.
And where's that cell site located, please? Here, right along 495 at the 95 intersection, is that correct?
Yes.
And those cell sites, do they provide coverage of Route 95?
Yes.
Now, after that 3:17 a.m. communication, the next cell site that is used for the purposes of data is at 4:21 a.m., is that correct?
Yes.
And did you travel to that particular location?
Yes.
And is that location documented here or shown here in Exhibit 291D?
Yes.
And can you point that out, please, and identify that? That's this location here, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 291E. Do you see the yellow dot in that exhibit?
Yes.
And that yellow dot in that exhibit, is that located at the same place that you just pointed out on the prior exhibit?
Yes.
That's a location in the North Attleboro Industrial Park, is that correct?
Jeff is leading, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Did you travel to that location?
Yes.
And if I may, Your Honor. I'm going to show you a photograph. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes.
What's depicted in that photograph, please?
This is a T-Mobile cell site location.
And in relationship to the yellow dot there on this exhibit and the last cell location you identified in the last map, what does that photograph show?
It shows that location on the map.
That's the appearance of the actual cell site, is that correct?
Yes.
And does that fairly and accurately depict the cell site as it appears looking at it from the ground?
It does.
I'm going to offer this as the next exhibit, please, Your Honor.
No objection.
Marked as the next exhibit.
now it's been marked exhibit number 292. That's the cell site that you observed at that location, is that correct?
Yes.
And now with reference to 291E, that yellow dot that is there on the side, that's the place where that cell site is that correct?
Correct.
And could you describe this area that's depicted here in this map, 291E? Are you familiar with that location?
Yes.
And can you describe that location for us, please?
The location's just off of Route 95. It's a suburban area. I believe there's at that location there's some type of large facility, like a business.
And just orienting you to this location, this is that's the same as this location here, is that correct?
Yes.
And does this cell site provide coverage in this area in your observation?
Yes.
And now, with reference to the exhibit 255, you described, I believe, that cell site was used during this data session or data communication at 4:21 a.m. Is that correct?
Yes.
And with respect to this very next data communication at 5:06 a.m., could you tell us what cell site location was used for that?
Yes.
What cell site was it?
The one depicted on the map that you just showed.
Same one, is that correct?
Yes.
And the very next one that's depicted here at 6:40 a.m., that's shown on the record at 6:40, what cell site was used when the phone communicated data to the T-Mobile network at that time?
The same location.
And the very next cell site, very next data communication now at 7:30 a.m. Could you tell us what cell location was used during that communication?
The same one.
Now, if we look at these cell identifiers here, do you see that the number has changed?
Yes.
And can you explain how it can be at that same, using that same cell site, and yet the number changed, please?
Yeah, as I mentioned, so the cell ID, there's the antenna, and connected to that antenna is a radio. So that lets us know that more than one antenna was involved in those data sessions.
And that tower that you just described, or in that photo, Exhibit 292, how high is that tower?
It's approximately 120 feet.
And at that height, if the phone is relatively close to the base of the tower, do you get a circumstance in which the tower can use different sides to communicate even though the phone hasn't moved?
Yes. It's a phenomenon called pore dominance, so you have multiple signal levels that the device is measuring. So it's always looking to be on the strongest, like I had mentioned before. So when you're that close to a site, it's very common that you can actually put your data calls or your voice calls up on multiple antennas on the site because you're so close.
And the very next communication at 8:17 a.m., do you see that there?
Yes.
And what cell location was used in the course of that data communication?
The same one.
And the very next communication at 9:20 a.m., do you see that there on the record?
Yes.
And what cell location was used during the course of that communication?
It's the same one.
The very next session communication at 10:53 a.m., do you see that there on the record?
Yes.
What cell location was used in that communication?
The same one.
The very next communication for the purposes of data at 12:05 in the afternoon, do you see that there?
Yes.
What cell location was used in the course of that communication?
The same one.
That very next communication there, do you see that?
Yes.
Oh. At 12:52 in the afternoon,
Yes.
what cell location was used during the course of that communication?
The same one?
Very next one at 1:55 p.m. Do you see that?
Yes.
And what cell site was used in the course of that data communication, please?
The same one?
That very next communication at 3:35 p.m., do you see that?
Yes.
Can you tell us what cell site was used during the course of that communication?
The same one?
We're going to suspend at this time. We'll resume tomorrow. Please drive safely, be safe in this weather. Continue to avoid anything that could be about this case in a newspaper, or radio, or television, or magazine, or on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or anything else. Continue to avoid speaking or emailing or texting or otherwise communicating in any form with anyone, including each other, about this case or Mr. Hernandez or anything that could be relevant to the case. If anyone attempts to communicate with you about your jury service or the case or Mr. Hernandez, please end it immediately. Don't do any research about the case, Mr. Hernandez, or anything you think could be relevant to the case, and please keep an open mind. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you.
He. All persons having anything further to do before the Honorable, the Justice E. Susan Gosh of the Superior Court, now sitting at Fall River within and for the Commonwealth, depart and give your attendance here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., to which time and place the sitting of this court is now adjourned. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Court is now adjourned.